guys. I'm going to start reading our Pippi Longstocking book now. We're going to be starting on chapter 1, Pippi Moves to Villa Canula. If you guys can see that. Chapter 1, Pippi Moves into Villa Canula. Way out at the end of a tiny little town was an old overgrown garden. And in the garden was an old house. And in that house lived Pippi Longstocking. She was 9 years old, and she lived there alone. She had no mother and no father, and that was of course very nice because there was no one to tell her to go to bed just when she was having the most fun, and no one could make her take those cod liver oil when she would much prefer caramel candy. Once upon a time, Pippi had a father of whom she was extremely fond. Naturally, she had a mother too. But that was so long ago that Pippi didn't remember her at all. Her mother had died when Pippi was just a tiny baby and lay in a cradle and howled so nobody could go anywhere near her. Pippi was sure that her mother was now up in heaven, watching her little girl through the peephole in the sky. And Pippi often waved up to her and called, "Don't you worry about me, I'll always come out on top." Pippi had not forgotten her father. He was a sea captain who sailed on the great ocean, and Pippi had sailed with him in his ship until one day her father was blown overboard into a storm and disappeared. But Pippi was absolutely certain that he would come back. She would never believe that he had drowned. She was sure he had floated until he landed on an island inhabited by cannibals. And she thought he had become the king of all the cannibals and went around with a golden crown on his head all day long. "My papa is a cannibal king. He certainly isn't every child who has such a stylish papa," Pippi used to say with satisfaction. "And as soon as my papa has built himself a boat, he'll come and get me and I'll be the cannibal princess. Hi-ho, won't that be exciting?" Her father had bought an old house in the garden many years ago. He thought he would live in there with Pippi when he grew old and couldn't sail the seas any longer. And then this annoying thing happened, and then he was blown into the ocean, and while Pippi was waiting for him to come back, she went straight home to Villa Canula. That was the name of her house. It stood there ready and waiting for her. One lovely summer evening, she had said goodbye, boys, she said, and kissed each one on the forehead. "Don't you worry about me. I'll always come out on top." 2 things she took with her from the ship: a little monkey whose name was Mr. Nelson. He was a present from her father, and a big suitcase full of gold pieces. The sailors stood upon the deck and watched as long as she could see her. She walked straight ahead without looking back at all, with Mr. Nelson on her shoulder and her suitcase in her hand. "A remarkable child," said one of the sailors as Pippi disappeared in the distance. He was right. Pippi was indeed a remarkable child. The most remarkable thing about her was that she was so strong. She was so very strong that in the whole wide world, there is not a single police officer as strong as she was. Why, she could lift a horse if she wanted to, and she wanted to. She had a horse of her own that she had bought with one of her many gold pieces the day she came home to Villa Canula. She had always longed for a horse, and now here he was, living on the porch. When Pippi wanted to drink her afternoon coffee, there she simply lifted him down into the garden. Besides Villa Canula was another garden and another house. In that house lived a father and a mother and 2 charming children, a boy and a girl. The boy's name was Tommy, and the girl's name was Annika. They were good, well brought up, and obedient children. Tommy would never think of biting his nails, and he always did exactly what his mother told him to do. Annika never fussed when she didn't get her own way, and she always looked pretty in her little well-ironed cotton dresses. She took the greatest care not to get them dirty. Tommy and Annika played nicely with each other in the garden, but they had often wished for a playmate. While Pippi was still sailing on the ocean with her father, they often used to hang over the fence and say to each other, Isn't it silly that nobody ever moves into that house? Somebody ought to live there. Somebody with children. On the lovely summer evening when Pippi for the first time stepped over the threshold of Villa Villacanula, Tommy and Annika were not at home. They had gone to visit their grandmother for a week, and so they had no idea that anybody had moved into the house next door. On the first day after they came home again, they stood by the gate, looking out onto the street, and even then, they didn't know there was a playmate so near. Just as they were standing there, considering what they should do, and wondering whether anything exciting was likely to happen, or whether it was going to be one of those dull days when they couldn't think of anything to play, just then, the Villa Villacanula opened, and a little girl stepped out. She was the most remarkable girl Tommy and Annika had ever seen. She was Miss Pippi Longstocking. This is the way she looked. Her hair, the color of a carrot, was braided in 2 tight braids that stuck straight out. Her nose was the shape of a very small potato and was dotted all over with freckles. It must be admitted that the mouth under this nose was a very wide one, with strong white teeth. Her dress was rather unusual. Pippi herself had made it. She had meant it to be blue, but there wasn't quite enough blue cloth, so Pippi had sewed little red pieces on it here and there. On her long, thin legs, she wore a pair of long stockings, one brown and the other black. She had on a pair of black shoes that were exactly twice as long as her feet. These shoes were her father's, had he brought to her in South America, so that Pippi would have something to grow into, and she never wanted to wear any others. But the thing that made Tommy and Annika open their eyes the widest of all was the monkey sitting on the strange girl's shoulders. It was a little monkey dressed in blue pants, a yellow jacket, with a white straw hat. Pippi walked along the street with one foot on the sidewalk and the other in the gutter. Tommy and Annika watched as long as they could see her. In a little while she came back, and now she was walking backwards. That was because she didn't want to turn around to get home. When she reached Tommy's and Annika's gate, she stopped. The children looked at each other in silence. At last, Tommy spoke. "Why did you walk backwards?" "Why did I walk backwards?" said Pippi. "Isn't this a free country? Can't a person walk any way she wants to? For that matter, let me tell you that in Egypt everybody walks that way, and nobody thinks it's the least bit strange." "How do you know?" asked Tommy. "You've never been to Egypt, have you?" "I've never been to Egypt. Indeed I have. That's one thing you can be sure of. I have been all over the world and seen things stranger than people walking backwards. I wondered what you would have said if I had come along walking on my hands in the way they do in farthest India." "Now, you must be lying," said Tommy. Pippi thought for a moment. "You're right," she said. "I am lying." It's wicked to lie," said Annika, who had the least gathered up enough courage to speak. "Yes, it's very wicked to lie," said Pippi, even more sad, "but I don't forget it now and then." "And how can you expect a little child whose mother is an angel and whose father is the king of the cannibal island and who herself has sailed on the ocean all her life, how can you expect her to tell the truth anyways? And for that matter," she continued, her whole freckled face lighting up, "let me tell you that in the Congo there is not a single person who tells the truth. They all lie all day. Begin at 7 in the morning and keep on until sundown. So if I should happen to lie now and then, you must try to excuse me and to remember that it is only because I stayed in the Congo a little too long. We can be friends anyways, can't we?" "Oh, sure," said Tommy, and realized suddenly that this was not going to be one of those dull days. "By the way, why couldn't you come and have breakfast with me?" said Pippi. "Why not?" said Tommy. "Come on, let's go." "But first, I must introduce you to Mr. Nilsson," said Pippi, and the little monkey took off his cap and bowed politely. Then they all went through Villa Villacanula's tumble-down garden gate, along the gravel path bordered with an old moss-covered trees. Really good climbing trees they seemed to be. Up to the house, onto the porch, there stood the horse, munching some oats in a soup bowl. "Why do you have a horse on the porch?" asked Tommy. All horses he knew lived in stables. "Well," said Pippi thoughtfully, "he'd be in the way in the kitchen, and he doesn't like the parlor." Tommy and Annika patted the horse, then went into the house. It had a kitchen, a parlor, a bedroom, but it certainly looked as if Pippi had forgotten to do her Friday cleaning that week. Tommy and Annika looked around cautiously, just in case the king of Cannibal Island might be sitting in the corner somewhere. They had never seen the Cannibal King in all their lives, but there was no father to be seen, nor any mother either. Annika said anxiously, "Do you live here all alone?" "Of course not," said Pippi. "Mr. Nilsson and the horse live here too." "Yes, but I mean, don't you have any mother or father here?" "No, not the least tiny bit of one," said Pippi happily. "But who tells you when you go to bed at night and the things like that?" said Annika. "I tell myself," said Pippi. "First I tell myself in a nice friendly way, and then, if I don't remind myself, I tell myself again, more sharply. And if I still don't mind, then I'm in for a spanking, see?" Tommy and Annika didn't see at all, but they thought maybe it was a good way. Meanwhile, they had come out into the kitchen, and Pippi cried, "Now we're going to make a pancake. Now there's going to be a pancake. Now we're going to fry a pancakey." Then she took 3 eggs and threw them up in the air. One fell on her knee and broke so that the yolk ran into her eye, but the other one caught skillfully in a bowl where they were smashed into pieces. "I always did hear the egg yolk was good for your hair," said Pippi, wiping her eye. You wait and see. Mine will soon begin to grow so fast it'll crackle." And here's a picture of the page of her making breakfast. As a matter of fact, in Brazil, all the people go about with egg in their hair. And there is no bald-headed people. Only once was there a man who was so foolish that he ate his eggs instead of rubbing them on his hair. He became completely bald, and when he showed himself on the street, there was such a riot that the police were called out. While she was speaking, Pippi had neatly picked the eggshell out of the bowl with her fingers. Now she took a bath brush and hung it on the wall and began to beat the pancake batter so hard that it splashed all over the walls. At last she poured what was left onto the griddle that stood on the stove. When the pancake was brown on one side, she tossed it halfway to the ceiling so that it turned right around in the air, and then she caught it on the griddle again. And when it was ready, she threw it straight across the kitchen right into the plate that stood on the table. "Eat," she cried, "eat before it gets cold." And Tommy and Annika ate and thought it was a really good pancake. Afterward, Pippi invited them to step into the parlor. There was only one piece of furniture in there. It was a huge chest with many tiny drawers. Pippi opened the drawers and showed Tommy and Annika all the treasure she kept there. There were wonderful bird eggs, strange shells and stones, pretty little boxes, lovely silver mirrors, pearl necklaces, and many other things that Pippi and her father had brought on their journeys around the world. Pippi gave each of her new playmates a little gift to remember her by. Tommy got a dagger with a shimmering mother-of-pearl handle, and Annika a little box with a cover decorated with pink shells. In the box, there were a ring with a green stone. "Suppose you have to go home now," said Pippi, "so that you can come back tomorrow. Because if you don't go home, you can't come back, and that would be a shame." Tommy and Annika agreed that it would be indeed. So they went home, past the horse, who had now eaten up all the oats, and out through the gate of Villa Canula. Mr. Nilsson waved his hat at them as they left.